The ABC is balanced, and only an evil, far-right, conservative, racist, neo-Nazi would say otherwise.
In 2018, trust in Australia continues to decline across all four of the key institutions: media, business, government and NGOs. We have hit 5-year lows in every institution, and all institutions are now in distruster territory.
Australians are losing trust in our institutions, and it's not hard to see why. They spew an endless sea of lies and half-truths while flat out ignoring the will of the people. When 7 out of 10 people don't want any more migrants, yet the government continues to let in hundreds of thousands a year, losing trust is the least of their worries. But it's not just governments we are losing faith in. We are also fast losing trust in those who are meant to hold them to account: the media. In 2017, public trust in the Fourth Estate dropped to an all-time low.
Is that because of fake news?
Yeah, pretty much. But it's deeper than that. The media are supposed to hold the ruling class to account, but in the current year,
because it's 2015,
it seems they are far more interested in pushing an agenda than providing objective reporting and analysis. What agenda might that be, Matty? That is a really good question.
You know, the balance and bias is often in the eye of the beholder, and that's one of the things that the ABC has to wrestle with, is that it wants its presenters to be able to really choose their own people and all the rest. There can't be word coming down from on high as to who goes on what programs or whatever. So individuals do their best, and I know Tony does. But the fact of the matter is that there aren't any, I'm not trying to take your job, by the way, Tony, there aren't any right-wing or conservative presenters.
I'm not feeling terribly threatened, I must say.
I'll give you that. Good. There aren't any recognised conservative presenters on the ABC of major shows, so you can draw your own conclusions from that. But equally, they would argue that they're not left-wing either. And
as I said, Tom Switzer, Amanda Vanstone, they're
on the major programs. Yeah,
on the major programs.
Yeah.
So, but by the same token, where's your evidence the ABC is biased in any way?
I'm not saying the ABC is biased. I said it's in the eye of the beholder.
This exchange demonstrates the deep problem with the Australian media. Rowan Dean is supposed to be a right-wing outsider, but fails miserably to hold the ABC to account when given the chance. You see, we do actually have proof the ABC is biased to the left, and not just the left, but way to the far left. It's essentially nothing more than a centre for communist propaganda. In 2013, the University of Sunshine Coast completed a survey of 605 Australian journalists. It was the largest of its kind in 20 years. They asked about political leanings and who each journalist intended to vote for. The results are about what you'd expect if you've been paying attention to the media over the last few decades. Keep in mind, back in 2013, Tony Abbott was leader of the Liberal Party, and they at least pretended to represent their conservative base. They still had plenty of leftists in the party and couldn't be considered a truly right-wing party, but let's just say they were centre-right, to be generous. First up, we have the so-called far-right News Limited. When surveyed, 46.5% of News Limited journalists said they'd vote for the coalition, 26.7% said they'd vote for the ALP, and 19.8% said they'd vote for the far-left Communist Greens. So even at the supposedly far-right, Murdoch-owned News Limited, the split between left and right is even. They do have the highest proportion of coalition voters of all three organisations surveyed, but they are not a right-wing news organisation as the far left like to claim. When you are to the left of Stalin, even fellow left-wingers are far right. News Limited are definitely the least likely to push a leftist agenda, but they are not right-wing, given that 1/5 of journalists there said they'd vote for the far-left Greens. Next up, we have Fairfax Media, where 54.7% of journalists would vote for the ALP and 19.8% would vote for the coalition or the communists. This shows a huge bias to the left and wouldn't surprise anyone familiar with the content they produce. They are, after all, the home of Pigantine Pig and Waleed Ali, among others. The high number of ALP voters could also explain their willingness to strike whenever staff numbers are cut.
Isn't that a little bit counterproductive?
Great point, Short Bus. Last on the list, we have the totally balanced and totally not biased Australian Broadcasting Corporation, otherwise known as the ABC. Here, 41.2% of journalists would vote for the Greens, 32.4% would vote for the ALP, and just 14.7% would vote for the Coalition. We should also take note of the large other vote that sits at 11.7%. Whilst we don't know exactly who these people would vote for, it is unlikely they are voting for the LDP or One Nation. It's much more likely they are voting for far left parties such as the Trotskyist Socialist Alliance. Either way, this is clear evidence of not just an overwhelming bias to the left, but a strong bias to the far left. This explains the trash propaganda they try to pass off as comedy. The ABC is balanced and... When we look at the results in total, we can see a clear left-wing bias across the mainstream media. 43% of journalists say they'd vote for the ALP, 30.1% would vote for the Coalition, and 19.4% would vote for the far left Greens. That means while only 30% of journalists would vote for a centre-right party, about 62% would vote for either a left-wing or far left-wing party. What about the journalists who refuse to respond, Matty? That's actually a good question. It's true that about 38%, or roughly 225 of the journalists surveyed, said they either didn't know or refused to answer. Of those who did answer, 237 said they'd vote left or far left, and 114 said they'd vote centre right. If the did not answers were split evenly between left and centre right, the numbers would be roughly 349 to 227, or 61% to 39% respectively, not including the other vote, of course. In order for there to be a 50-50 split, about 77% of the did not answers would need to vote centre right.
They didn't really ask that many people though.
That's an interesting point there, Short Bus, but it's actually not correct.
Er?
The sample size was actually more than acceptable. As mentioned, this was the largest survey of its kind for 20 years. Just for a comparison, one of Australia's most respected polling companies, Newspoll, usually surveys between 1,500 and 2,000 people. They use that to extrapolate the voting intentions of the entire country. A sample size of 380 journalists is more than adequate to extrapolate across the relatively small media industry. The survey also asked journalists to rate their own political leanings, and the results were even more telling. 51% said they lean left, 36.1% said they were in the centre, and only 12.9% were brave enough to say they lean right. Take note, when a journalist says they are in the centre, they usually mean they are on the left, but are not honest enough to admit it. It is clear that based on voting intentions and self-assessment, the Australian media is biased to the left. This is a fact, but don't expect an admission anytime soon. When the media are so left-wing, it's no surprise they produce biased fake news regularly, and does anyone think they are less biased now than they were in 2013? The rot goes all the way to the top. I recently submitted 2 complaints to the Australian Press Council. If you don't know who they are, this is how they describe themselves. The Australian Press Council is responsible for promoting good standards of media practice, community access to information of public interest, and freedom of expression through the media. The Council is the principal body with responsibility for responding to complaints about Australian newspapers, magazines, and associated digital outlets. It's their job to ensure journalists do the right thing, so I complained about 2 articles regarding the recent political rally at St Kilda Beach. The first article claims that right-wing extremists were planning a Cronulla-style race riot and has a video thumbnail of Australian patriot Blair Cottrell right at the top. The thumbnail is him in front of a swastika. This is their response, and I quote, "After careful consideration, the Executive Director has decided not to proceed further with the complaint. We note that prior to the protest, several Facebook events pertaining to the rally were taken down by Facebook for containing hate speech and violent comments. Such pages, for instance, referred to the event as Robber Stomper 2.0 and Cronulla 2.0. While these event pages may not have been authorised by the rally's organisers and do not necessarily reflect the views of all participants, they clearly demonstrate that a contingent of the protesters intended to incite violent racial protests, not unlike the Cronulla riots." The problem with this response is not once does the article mention any Facebook group, and as the Press Council states, Zuckerberg zucked them. There are repeated mentions of Neil Erikson and Blair Cottrell, along with other nationalist groups. Not one of the groups mentioned in the article calls for any violence. Neither the Press Council nor News Limited provide any evidence at all for their claim. Do they have any proof those pages weren't just leftists trying to smear the event? Of course they don't, and it fits the leftist MO perfectly. I guess that means a journalist could write an article and use the headline, "Communist revolutionaries want to take down government and install brutal dictatorship," then write an article about the ABC that doesn't mention a single revolutionary, and the Press Council would say that's totally fine. Basically, the Australian Press Council says it's okay to publish fake news and use deliberately misleading headlines. The next article in question described Blair Cottrell as a Nazi sympathiser, a clear case of defamation, and this is their response. After careful consideration, the Executive Director has decided not to proceed further with the complaint. In reaching this decision, we have taken into account that Mr. Cottrell has made various public comments in the past in which he expressed clear pro-Nazi views, and such comments are well documented. Accordingly, the description of Mr. Cottrell as a Nazi sympathiser is not inaccurate or misleading. While we appreciate that the individuals that attended the St Kilda protest are not all neo-Nazis by virtue of their attendance, the article does not, in our opinion, make this claim. The description of the rally itself, however, as a neo-Nazi rally is not substantially misleading given the prominent role of Blair Cottrell as an organiser and leader of the rally, and in light of the controversial actions of many attendees, including raising Nazi salutes, which again are well documented. They are, of course, referring to the so-called Roman salutes that have been thoroughly debunked as fake news. The guy in the red was simply raising his hand, and the other guy was clearly mocking the communist left. The worst thing about this response is Blair Cottrell has never expressed clear pro-Nazi views. This is a flat-out lie.
But the essence of all of this slander against me is that I am a neo-Nazi. But how did they come to that conclusion? Is it because I'm blonde and I love my country? Oh, that's right, the Hitler's Book in School's Facebook comment. You do realise that the same fake account that made that post is still active right now and is still making phony posts, which the media attributes to me. Despite this imposter getting reported hundreds of times for years, Facebook still hasn't deleted this page. And the account still makes posts and attributes them to me, has a few thousand followers too, who may actually think it's me. That is seriously their proof that I am secretly a neo-Nazi. That, and also this photo of me doing an interview with a News Corp journalist, which News Corp edited to add a swastika in behind me, then published it, and still publishes it whenever they get the chance. Maybe it's finally time these people became acquainted with my lawyer. He's a very good lawyer.
I guess defamation and lies are also good media practice. The truth is, you cannot trust the media to report objectively, nor can you trust them to regulate their own lies. There was once a time that the mainstream media held power to account, but that time ended years, if not decades ago. They are globalists, they are on the left, and for the most part, they do not care about the truth or the nations they live in. In the past, they might have held the ruling class accountable, but one day they realised it was far more profitable simply to join them. I hope you enjoyed the video, share the truth around, and I'll see ya when I see ya. Climate change is man-made. 97% of scientists say so, and only far-right climate deniers disagree.
Fake news.
Gay marriage is the same as real marriage. Alex Jones is a far-right conspiracy theorist.
Go back to Frankfurt.
We know who is responsible. It's not the Africans on the streets. It's not the African community leaders.
The government.
And it's not the Muslims. It's this corrupt media government alliance, and it has been from the beginning.